Hello and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who is currently waiting outside of a blood rave. It's Kai, aka Philly Trainer. Hey, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Mark. Thank you for having me.
How's the line?
It is pretty jumping right now. It's a lot of people out here. You know, we're all waiting, chilling, waiting to get in this party. You know.
Did you bring an extra change of clothes with you? Because it is a blood... Like, you can't go home covered in blood, can you?
No, you can. You definitely can go home covered in blood. I mean, I am. I always do.
Oh, wow. That's bold.
That's more fun that way, right?
Yeah, just scare people walking down the street?
Yeah, I mean, hey, look. If you see somebody walking towards you with covered in blood down the street and you decide to walk towards them, that's your fault for whatever happens afterwards.
Imagine.
You should know better than to be walking towards somebody covered in blood. So all I'm saying is if you see me walking down the street covered in blood, I've just come from a blood rave that I have survived for a reason. So
you know what would be awesome? There are some tourists in Philly right now, and they just get lost, and they're driving around the city at night, and a couple hundred blood-covered people walk out of a building while they're sitting at a stoplight.
Yeah. You know what would be even better?
What?
Is if they were coming out of Eastern State Penitentiary.
Just seeing that?
And just seeing that, like, a bunch of blood-soaked, covered demon people coming out of a old abandoned prison while you're sitting at the light parked, stopped. Yeah, I think that would be perfect. That would be even better.
I wish we would have done those for those Comic-Cons that I worked with you in Philly. We should have done that. That should have been like a Saturday night, sell tickets and go do that.
You know what they say, right?
What?
Never say never.
Yeah, that's right. Let's get it going, man. 2021. Blood rave, and then scare people.
Eastern State ain't going nowhere. So, you know, it's been there for a while. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So, yeah.
All right, and so we're talking about Blade 2 today. I gave you an option of a few pretty good movies. How come you picked Blade 2? What kind of led you to want to do this one?
All right, so the reason I picked Blade 2 was, one, Wesley Snipes, all right? Yeah. So for me, as a kid growing up, Wesley Snipes was like one of the few black, like, action dudes that was like a box office draw and like really good at what he did, you know? And then when he came out with the first Blade, to me, that movie just blew my mind. And then the second one just took it up to the next step. So it's always held this like near and dear place in my heart, in terms of just action movies starring like a black lead.
When people talk about superhero movies too, they're like, oh yeah, Spider-Man kicked it off, or X-Men kicked it off in 2000. I'm like, where's Blade at? I mean, 98.
Yeah.
You know, this movie, like Blade was an R-rated, like, box office success. It was a very successful movie. And I don't think it gets its due when it comes to leading the charge of comic book films.
Oh, not at all. Like, you know, I think for two reasons. I think one of the main reasons is because at that time there was no real push for the comic book, quote unquote, comic book movie in the same way it is now. You know, back then you just had studios like buying, you know, scripts from these companies or from these people who adapted them from these books, and they were just like, oh, this seems like a good story, whereas now there's more of a push to bring the comic to the screen. Back then it was more or less like, let's get a good adaptation of this on screen and just see what happens. So back then you didn't really look at it as a comic book movie, but it should definitely be considered the first, or one of the first, to really set off that kind of interest. And we want to see more of this. Like, there should definitely be more of these being made.
It was a pretty wise decision to go with vampires too, because 95 was Interview with the Vampire, and then you had From Dusk Till Dawn. So vampires were kind of hot in the 90s as well. So to release a half vampire, half human, like, comic book, where, unless I think you were in a comic book bubble, a lot of people didn't know Blade. I think a lot of people, it's like Deadpool. Like, after Deadpool, people were like, yeah, I read Deadpool. Exactly. Like, no, you didn't.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really smart move, too, because, I mean, comics, they weren't cool in the 90s. It wasn't probably until Spider-Man was good, X-Men was good, but now it probably wasn't until the 2010s where SDCC, San Diego Comic-Con, and all this made comics cool. So I also think it was smart to release Blade, this badass ninja wiping out yuppie vampires. And so people weren't going, I'm going to a comic book movie. They're like, I'm going to go watch Wesley Snipes destroy some people.
Exactly. And then I think that's the major difference between then and now. Like even when you look at the worst but best comic book movie like made back then to me was Spawn, right? So you look at Spawn. Like as a kid, that was an amazing movie to me. Like I didn't go into Spawn as a kid, like with the same critical friggin' eye that I have now for movies. When I went into Spawn as a kid, I went into it like wanting to see the comic book that I read like on the screen. But at the same time, I didn't think of it as a comic book movie. I just thought of it as an action movie that just so happens to be a comic book, And with Blade, I think you had that same effect, whereas we didn't watch Blade thinking of it as a comic book movie. And then, like you said, comics weren't popular in the 90s unless you were one of those kids like me who was an art kid who was into comics and who was into, manga and anime. So unless you were into that world, like you said, you didn't know who Blade was. You didn't know he really existed. But then when that movie came out, it piqued the interest of, one, that property and that character, and then two, what more can we do with these comic book movies? So the fact that after Blade launched or kickstarted that kind of interest in the comic book movie. And then from that point, that's when you saw the increase of them being made and being optioned to be made. So it definitely is one of those things where it was smart, for Marvel to release the movie the way they did it. Miramax, I believe, was the studio that produced the movie. So it was smart across the board because it just brought Blade into the limelight. Then you started seeing him on the Spider-Man cartoon, which was pretty cool. So yeah, man, it has such a near and dear spot in my heart as just such a good badass action movie.
Do you know why I watched Spawn?
Why?
Because I was a big John Leguizamo fan. I had no idea who Spawn was, right? I was like, oh, hey, it's Spawn. What? I just read X-Men comics. I was a huge X-Men nerd. I loved the cartoon. That was all I was into. I only cared about X-Men. But then I was like, hey, John Leguizamo's playing a clown in a movie. I was like, sweet. So I went to watch Spawn because of John Leguizamo, not because it was a comic. So it's kind of so fun. That explains the 90s, right?
Right, exactly. And and that goes to show. That was my cat. Sorry.
My cat walked in the room the same time that happened, actually. My cat Stella's right in here right now next to me. So I think they're communicating, man.
Yeah, he's like knocking stuff over. But if you look at the movie industry, I guess you could say in the 90s, where it was more about the movie star.
Jim Carrey making $20 million. Will Smith making $20 million.
Exactly. It was a different kind of era in filmmaking in itself. So, like you say, you went because of John Leguizamo. Like I went to see because of Wesley Snipes, not because it was a Marvel adaptation. Whereas now it's the reverse. It's like, a lot of these movies have big names in them now, but you're literally going not because of the name. You're going because of the universe that has been created because of the almighty Feige, right? So, when you go to these movies, you're going to see the universe, which then creates comic book fans. So it's like this weird flip flop that's kind of happened where we used to go for the actors, and now we're going to see the action and the comic book come to life, so to say.
Yeah, there's very few of those actors left that can draw. Like I was working in a movie theater in '99, and I remember Runaway Bride opened, and that is just the most bland romantic comedy. But it had Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. That movie, with inflation, I think it made 500 million world. It did Marvel money. That's how big Julia Roberts was in the 90s.
Exactly, yeah.
It was just great. But also, I want to say, I'm so happy you picked Blade 2 because I went out and I bought the Blu-ray. No, I bought a 4-pack, and then it didn't have any extras. So I'm like, crap. So I went and bought the Blade 2 Blu-ray. And there are 3 DVD commentaries on it. There's one with Guillermo del Toro, Then there's one with Guillermo del Toro and a producer. And then there's one, which is really sad, because I don't know how much you know about Blade Trinity, but there's a commentary with Wesley Snipes and David Goyer, who had an infamous falling out on Blade Trinity. So, like, they got into it, like, supposedly Wesley Snipes choked Goyer. Goyer hired bikers to keep Snipes away from him. They wouldn't communicate. They only communicated via sticky notes. But it made me really sad, dude, because they're sitting there together laughing and having a good time talking about Blade 2, talking about Blade 3. And I'm like, these guys are going to have a massive falling out. So,
yeah.
But I'll tell you though, I pretty much know everything about Blade 2 now. I don't know how, you know what? I love knowing everything about Blade 2 now because, you know, I know they went to Prague, right, to film this to save money.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
And I kind of love that. It's like people coming to Atlanta now. You know, a lot of big movies, which helped me greatly working in the film industry. You come to Atlanta if you want to fill a stadium scene. If you need 2,000 extras, you come to Atlanta. You don't go to New York or L.A. You know, they filled up in Pittsburgh with Dark Knight Rises with extras because you could pay them $50. You don't have to pay them $100.
Exactly.
But in Prague, these extras in that massive club scene were working for $18 a day. Wow. And they had 8,000 people apply, and they only picked 1,000 to make $18 a day. And then they shot in there for 5 days. I don't know. And they did, like, these extras in this movie. I love that dancing scene. Normally when I watch, like, you watch a lot of movies, right? And you notice the extras. Like, I hate medieval peasant extras. I think they're the worst. But watching this one in the Blood Rave, the extras are awesome in these movies. I love the extra club. Like, they had to keep, so in this movie, there's no music playing in this giant, what is it, the House of Pain. There's no music playing. They had to fake all this energy. I don't know. I love this scene. They brought it. Like, there was a lot of energy going on.
And you know what's funny? I like how that kind of became like a thing in the Blade movies where you were like there was always this scene where it was like in the first one, that opening scene where he goes to the club and he just starts taking everybody out in the club and they're all dancing and starts raining blood and he's throwing his friggin', boomerang knife and he's cutting everybody up. And then in the second one where they're in the warehouse club, you know what I mean? So it was like something you were looking forward to seeing and you kind of expected to happen in the Blade movies. It was like that scene where he's just going to come in and he's just going to swoop down and there's going to be a bunch of bloodsuckers and he's just going to take them all out in the most stylish way possible.
And I gotta tell you, that Blood Rave scene for Blade and, you know, the DJ putting his arms out in the air, that moment on the trailer, I bet you that moment in the trailer brought in $10 million just because it was so iconic. And then in Blade 2, there's that scene where he's running through the tunnels and he has both arms outstretched with the guns with the Reapers following him.
Oh, yeah.
These movies know how to make trailer moments, for sure. Like, there's some really badass moments. And also, in the House of Pain, we're going to jump all over the place. If you're listening to this, you've definitely watched Blade 2. And I love how in the House of Pain, I always thought about this, but I learned from Del Toro in the commentary, in the House of Pain, they're dancing, and then the camera goes underneath to the sewers where the Reapers are waiting.
Yeah.
I'm like, why is there a sewer underneath this place? And Del Toro's like, I don't know. He's like, but he came up with a story where so many humans are murdered in the House of Pain that at the end of the night, they just hose down the floor and they throw the bodies and they hose the blood into that sewer. So it's easier cleanup. So for years, doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And it's funny because now I'm like, I have to get this commentary Blu-ray now because I just have the old school DVD, you know?
Wesley Snipes is so funny on this, man. I love him on this commentary. He's talking about how he almost brought in Michael Jackson to be a vampire pimp, but the scheduling didn't work out. He's talking about, and he also talked about how he's like, man, I need for the third one, he's like, I need a bevy of bitches. He's like, Blade's got to get laid. He keeps talking about how he needs a girlfriend. And then he's also talking about, what I love